we still have a scarcity of competent individuals.
Think about what you are interested in and most passionate about, and then choose a pathway into that.
You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and step out your comfort zone.
Hello and welcome to My Green Future, a podcast where we look at career planning through a green lens.
And this is the first episode in this whole series. And for this episode, I am going to be talking to Darian. I hope you're going to be interesting.
No, why did you come to me for this first?
Because you're actually quite an unusual person in this space.
Oh, that's so true.
You've had an entire career with a sustainability focus, right from when you began your undergraduate degree. This was in the back of your mind. So you've got a kind of an interesting and almost unique perspective on how the industry has developed, where it all was 30 years ago when you started, what the mindset was, and where we stand now in terms of the careers and the thinking and the approach that's brought to it. So just that broad perspective, I thought, was a good place to begin this career.
Okay, so if you want to hear more about what it was like doing sustainability in the 1990s through to today, please listen to this conversation.
And here it is. Let's get into it. Greg, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Teymoor. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. Nice to see you, Greg.
Thank you, Darian.
So look, you are positioned as the conduit between job seekers and job offerers. And when it comes to sustainability, Acre, that is your area of focus, people to fill sustainability type roles. Tell me a little bit about that role, that marketplace, and what you do.
Sure. I touch on sort of explaining where Acre sits as an organization. So we focus on sustainability as a theme, and that's all that we focus on. And in terms of an area of our expertise, we operate globally in that sense, and we work with corporates, non-profits, consultancies, financial services firms on building out their in-house sustainability teams, and also a lot of those sort of businesses have front-end sustainability services, etc. We work on those two areas, but we also work with organizations that have a purpose-led or impact-led sort of goal to their overall ambitions. And in those sorts of roles, also those sorts of clients, we'll work on building out their overall C-suite and wider role type. But the theme of sustainability is constant and has been there for the last 21 years.
Now, I want to take it back to where you started from. Now, you grew up in Zimbabwe. Is it fair to say that you were at one with nature? You had a lot of interaction with the natural world?
I think that's fair to say. I grew up in a small town inside a national park in northwest Zimbabwe. So it's always been a real core part, particularly the access to nature and the importance of conserving nature, but also the community sort of dependency and interaction with that as well. And that's progressed into more of a corporate setting, but that's definitely where it started.
And is that what influenced your choice of a degree? Because you studied environmental science, is that right?
Yeah, so I got a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science, Economics and Anthropology, which is a nice, well-rounded version of that. And it definitely from the beginnings of where I started and wanting to go further and understand a bit more depth behind that.
When you were doing that, when you were looking for that course and when you chose that course, what was the general level of interest amongst your peers in this area of activity?
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably had peers on both sides, either very focused on the environmental side and interested in it, and geography and environment, or I had peers just looking at economics and business science, and there wasn't much of a mixture there. It was technical or the business guys. I tried to sort of bring those two together, which I think a lot of people were doing that in my sort of group at the time, but it was there's interest. It just wasn't quite as pulled together and threaded together as we see sustainability today.
But then your first job was doing landscape gardening, wasn't it? Something quite practical.
Yeah.
And do you think it was that love of nature that took you there? And talk to us about those steps in your journey of how you went from growing up in Zimbabwe, loving nature, doing a degree related to the environment, then working very physically in the environment to where you are now, which is working on sustainability recruitment in Singapore. So talk us through those steps.
Yeah, so I finished my degree, which was actually done in South Africa at Rhodes University, and I decided to return back to Zimbabwe and spend a bit of time with the family there. And I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do next. And as it happens, my family are also very into the concept of being more sustainable, more responsible. And my sister in particular is very involved in plants and landscaping. And so there was an opportunity as soon as I got back to sort of join her on this this business that she had sort of started creating and take it a little bit further. So we set up a landscaping business that was really focused on being a sustainable landscaping organization. We only really used sort of natural, locally sourced sort of products. We also planted gardens that weren't full of annuals and flowers that needed to be replanted next season. And it was a sustainable, low water intensive sort of product that we were trying to put out. And it worked pretty well for a few years. I did find myself wanting a little bit more than just building little, very nice gardens, but in Harare. So I took a step out of that, and I went and did some environmental consulting in Mozambique for an interesting fisheries business. So I was looking at mapping the environmental conditions, moon phase, etc., against fishing catches and locations to try and figure out where the relationships were there. I did that for
very interesting kind of niche work. That
was.
Yeah,
Fisheries are so not niche. Fisheries and oceans.
for your average university graduate, I think going into a fishery, or the kind of work that you're talking about, is probably not the majority of ambition.
I loved it. It was so unique, and I was working night shifts for sort of 6-8 months. Sort of 30 days on and 7 days off, and we do night shifts because that's how the fishing sort of concept works with the fish we were after, Kapenta. But I'd be on these boats managing the rigs as well, and then sort of working on this environmental data to try and find some patterns there and try and be a little bit more predicting, trying to find a more predictable pattern of where we should be fishing under what conditions.
What a wonderful way of life. I mean, these days, as you're a recruiter, how many jobs like that are available? If I wanted to go and work on a fish farm in Harare, is that feasible?
Actually, there's a lot. Aquaculture is a very rapidly growing area of the food industry. Seafood has kind of flatlined from wild capture, but aquaculture is growing. It's grown 500% over the past, I think, 5 years, the latest FAO report said.
Fantastic. Which is why we're here talking about the growth of this market. I mean, have you, through this experience that you've had from your university days, your studies, and then your evolution through the job market, have you seen that market changing radically, significantly, and if so, how?
Yeah, I think over the last, so off the back of that, I ended up coming over to Acre, right? So I've been working with Acre since early 2015, so nine and a half years now. And over that period, the sort of evolution of the concept of sustainability has been amazing to watch in the real terms of actually what roles are around and what the way organizations are dealing with this challenge. Back when I started, at Acre we had a very technical team focused on environmental compliance and EHS, environmental health and safety, and then we had a slightly broader concept team, more on CR, so corporate responsibility and sustainability, but it was more community programs based and it was a little bit lighter in terms of lack of legislation. It was maybe those businesses looking to go a little bit further with their community projects and the sort of responsibility, but we had more compliance led, slightly separate from that, and those are often quite separate teams. Over time, there were also businesses without any of that, right? They just had an EHS team and no sustainability. And we'd be asking those tough questions of clients, sort of saying, what are you doing about, your waste or your supply chains? How sustainable are they? And it wasn't that much of an appetite back then. So in actual fact, our compliance-led business was larger than sustainability as it was then. And over the years, they came closer and closer together, which sort of got us to a point where we blended those teams and we actually work on all of those concepts still, but it sits across we now work that across industry focus as an individual or consultant or sort of background, rather than splitting out those two sort of disciplines. And sustainability as a whole should and when Darian and I had some work together when she was at Thai Union, EHS was sitting very closely to sustainability then, and there was an ongoing conversation about, are we going to be one team or is it separate? So that evolution period of sort of how that evolved, we were right at the front end of it, and we were supporting clients with giving them some perspective on what we thought and what others are doing. And I think if we look at it today, I don't think EHS and sustainability as a whole across every industry are blended, but in many industries they are. And compliance is the basis of the sort of first thing you need to do, but many clients are obviously pushing far beyond that into a competitive advantage position.
I'll go back to that first meeting. So I was working with Thai Union, and our European headquarters was in Paris, lovely office with a view of the Eiffel Tower. And Greg and his colleague Tom came across to Paris from London to talk about the role we were recruiting for, which was the head of environment, health and safety, which was going to come under my team. And Greg, you impressed me by saying that you were studying a degree or a grad certificate in occupational health and safety to help you with the recruiting work that you were doing. Can you tell us a bit more about that and why you thought you needed to do further training to give you the in-depth knowledge to help you connect with your clients?
I think it's the same reason why having the background in environmental science that I have it sort of supports me in my role. It's credibility and understanding of in-depth concepts when working with clients and candidates. It's the ability to speak to them in a more even playing field and not just be a supplier, a recruiter. The concept of Acre is really to make impact on an ongoing basis by each placement that we make. And everybody in the business is entirely motivated by that concept. We are a for-profit business, but impact and playing our role in the evolution of sustainability as a whole is really at the core of what we do. So I think in order for me to be as effective as I could be in my role, I decided to take on some extra sort of learning and development opportunities. One of them was a diploma in Foundations, Occupational Health and Safety. I didn't actually end up completing that course in the end because I ended up, I did it for a bit, but then I ended up focusing on a broader sort of concept as a discipline rather than just EHS as I was at the time. But I did pick up a few certificates. I've got an IOSH certificate in leading safely and a few others. And it's fundamental to be able to speak in the right language, to be able to conceptualize what an organization is struggling with and what they're trying to achieve, so that when we engage the market on their behalf, I actually know in depth what exactly they're dealing with, rather than just trying to fill a job description. It's always more of a story.
And I think one of the interesting areas that we're trying to explore in this series of podcasts is exactly that, is the extent to which people need to either re-educate or upskill themselves to get involved in sustainability theory, or how they can repurpose their existing skill set to the evolving job market. But before we get to that, I just want to dwell on this thing that you were just talking about there, that interaction. Thai Union, you as the recruitment agency, because that perspective of the companies needing to hire rather than the people looking for a job. Let's look from the recruiter perspective. So you were working for Thai Union, looking to hire somebody, you were providing the talent. From the in-house company perspective, when they're looking at the job market out there, how prepared is the average company to fulfill its own sustainability mandate, if I can put it that way?
Great question.
Do companies know how to set up a sustainability team in the first place, and how much can companies like Acre help them?
I think there's what we have a challenge with at the moment is we've got lots of businesses that come up with a very interesting role and concept and set of skill sets that they would like in a role, without really taking into account potential scarcity of those skills, or the combination of those skills at the price point that they're looking at. So if organizations are sort of crafting these roles without the input of a sort of qualified recruitment or headhunting sort of provider, we sometimes find that that's off the mark of what's actually out there. And we still have a scarcity of competent individuals because the demand has risen very quickly. And to be able to call yourself a competent sort of sustainability leader takes years of experience and qualifications behind them and everything else. So the talent hasn't been able to keep up in terms of the talent supply, has not been able to keep up with the demand we've seen. Is that fair to say, Darian?
Yeah, I think that is fair. And I can remember you challenging us when I was at Thai Union about where that role was being placed. So at that time, I was essentially the Chief Sustainability Officer. We were bringing the safety, health and environment team within the sustainability group, but it was an existing position and team, quite a significant team. And I can remember Greg and his colleague were challenging us at what level did that person come in? What were their responsibilities going to be? And in that sense, I think they were more than a recruiting company. They were really being a sounding board for the kinds of people who would be attracted to the role and the kinds of setup that you needed within the organisation to have a successful team. So that was a really useful piece of feedback and ongoing dialogue that we had with Acre beyond just doing the job search.
And it's probably worth sort of building on that a little bit. And some of the most exciting, interesting, challenging work that we take on and that particularly drives me is working with organizations to help design an optimal structure for what their overall ambitions are as a business. So you have to build an organizational structure that is fit for purpose, but also reflects what's available in the marketplace. And everyone has a budget, right? So again, that input into that and coming up with a solution to an overall business challenge and set of objectives with people is an exciting challenge. It's difficult, but it's an exciting challenge.
So from what you're saying, the job market right now, the scarcity of jobs, the scarcity of talent rather, the real opportunity is in expertise, is in niche and well-qualified people. So going out there, if anyone is looking to get a job in sustainability in a meaningful sense, the best thing they can do is go and upskill.
Yeah.
In any particular area, tell me where that market is growing and where the demand for skill is.
It's across the board. There are opportunities for individuals to upskill themselves and transition their career in many different environments, and we see a lot of that happening, particularly in-house. So businesses investing in their own people to transition into their sustainability teams, and that's a slightly easier way to do it. And if that's an opportunity of individuals that individuals see in their current organization, I would really advise sort of investing some time and speaking that through with the organization themselves, because it's a bit of a safe environment to be able to sort of pick up new skills, experience, and learnings under your sort of same employer, and it's a good indication if your employer is willing to sort of put that sort of investment into your own people.
It's like that conversation we had with Mikael Larsson.
Yes, I was thinking, we've had a few people on this podcast who have essentially trained into the roles while they've been in the job. So their organisation has supported them on that journey.
And that's actually pretty standard recruiting anyway. Most positions are filled not through advertising, but through either connections or within the company itself. Is that right?
I think so. It really depends what the role is and where the organization is on their journey. Some roles are just too technical. The need for previous experience and proven success in a particular role type is just too great. Maybe the risk of failure is too great to allow for that transition period to take place. So therefore you must go external. And that's often when we'll, I suppose, get that call or we'll be in touch with that business and advise that this is one of the roles that we should take external and go and find the right person. But going back to the point around sort of that upskilling opportunity and role types, I think if there's an in-house opportunity, it must be explored. And I think that's probably where people who are looking to make that transition should ask that question first, before looking to upskill and then just leaving the organization. Because one of the challenges out there as well is that the demand is for skilled, qualified, competent talent. The demand for transitional talent is not quite there yet. Ideally, companies want what they've written on paper in their job description, and they would prefer somebody that they already know, already know how to deliver on a project or particular sort of role type that they've described, rather than finding somebody that might be able to do this because they've done a transitional course. But I still think that should be looked at, because the talent gap that we have means that companies need to make compromises, and they can't always get what they would like to see, sort of higher in the market. So there's an opportunity for those compromises to be made and for people to step across.
Seen a number of mismatches between histories and roles in corporate hiring, haven't we?
Yeah, but
Never. I wanted to go back to something that Teymoor said, which is about how you find people. I mean, what is the black art of finding people to fill these roles? Because I think many of us will put our profile on LinkedIn. We think, well, our career history is out there. If you've done retraining, you've updated your profile. But how, as a recruiter, do you go about finding people with these specialist skill sets? And what could people do to really flag that they're looking for a new role?
If somebody is looking to make that transition, I think you've got to speak to specialist recruiters, and not just Acre. There are others out there. So I think it's about taking those first steps. Have the chat internally first. If it's not an opportunity there, look at the opportunities to upskill. There's subsidized opportunities across Singapore and other parts of the world as well. There are transitional courses specifically built for mid-careerists looking to transition to sustainability.
Just as a slight segue to that question, a slight tangent, but there seems to be this perception out there that when you apply for a job, the first thing that happens is an AI will read your CV and filter out that first line without a human even looking at it. So again, just to Darian's point, I mean, how does one stand out in a transitional situation if you don't have the traditional tick boxes that will appear on a job description? How do you get past that? I mean, how can you get in front of someone and say, look, I realize I may not tick this particular box, but here's why you should still think about me?
Yeah.
And does the AI really screen out a lot of the candidates when you're looking for a position?
I'm not 100% sure there's that much AI actually out there in the recruitment sort of job advert space. I think conceptually, I think people think there's a lot, but I don't actually think there is. There's in-house recruiters.
If you press quick apply on LinkedIn, it's not going through some screening process just of the keywords.
Potentially, it's not really where we work in the people-to-people conversations, right? So I don't really know, but I'm not plugging Acre here. I'm plugging recruiters that are focused on this, but that face-to-face conversations with somebody who is able to engage directly with hiring managers, rather than applying to these large adverts and being one of many applicants, is likely a better route for those making the transition. And not everyone's going to want to have a conversation with you or have the time for it, but I think that is your best starting point, is a direct conversation where you can tell your narrative and your journey to an individual in a role like mine, a specialized recruitment role in sustainability environment.
Do you find that there's a lot of commonalities of the skill sets and the pools of people who are going for these jobs, or is it an entirely different network that you see in Asia Pacific to, say, the US or the EU?
It is different. The relationship between established headhunters and specialists like us and clients, I think, is slightly more appreciated particularly in the UK and in larger European businesses. There's a bit of a mixed approach or appreciation towards the offering that we can bring.
And what about the market itself? I mean, is there a difference in the jobs available and the demand of particular skill sets in Asia and Europe?
There is. One of the major complexities in this region that we don't see so much of in Europe is because each country in Southeast Asia and across Asia has their own approach, their own set of objectives, their own set of legislation. in comparison to the UK, obviously now out of EU, but previously all under the EU framework, means that you have a very uneven landscape of what's actually happening on the ground, what objectives there are, how much support the government is giving. So any organization with operations across this region wanting a consistent approach to sustainability, it takes a lot of work. And it's not as easy as setting out a blanket strategy across your region, because each country expects slightly different ways of reporting on that and ways of working. So it's complicated in that regard. The actual market itself, I think, it's not behind some of the other regions, but sustainability as a whole and the concept of legislation behind it, it is a little bit further behind what I'd seen in what we see in Europe and in the UK. And so in that regard, there are some concepts that we've seen dealt with already elsewhere that are now coming into fruition here, which is actually quite useful for businesses out here, because there's learning curves that they can take from the way it happened out in other regions. But there's also people that have dealt with some of these challenges elsewhere that we can bring that talent in to help businesses move through that journey.
What are the hot areas of sustainability for recruitment in Asia Pacific, either by country or by sector?
We're seeing strong support and continued development around nature-based solution and carbon credit sort of project development. A lot of that we're seeing a more invested approach towards circularity, particularly in the consumer goods businesses, and plastic being such a large issue out here. We're seeing a much wider ecosystem starting to work on the issue of plastics, rather than individual companies trying to sort that issue out themselves.
Tell me a bit more about roles in circular.
So businesses are looking at things like their packaging and waste, and seeing the importance of dealing with that. Actually, the importance of their liability and responsibility in regards to what happens to a product or a package after it leaves the producer's hands. I think there's a greater appreciation for the life cycle of a product now than there was a few years ago, and the responsibility of the producer of that product to create an opportunity for circularity and recycling and different ways of sort of working with that, rather than once I sell this product, it's out of my hands, it's not my responsibility anymore.
So specific areas of interest in terms of jobs and in terms of activities in Asia, and a specific focus on expertise, differing amongst the countries as well.
Very much.
Having said that, then, what are the kind of qualifications that you think would be most helpful? Somebody who wants to think, okay, I'm going to shoot for a role like that. Mm-hmm. Where are the most credible, most useful qualifications or courses that are available here, do you think?
And is it ever too late? Because as I hear you speaking about this, to think, if you were really passionate about, let's say, nature-based solutions, have you missed the crest of the wave? If you decide that you're going to go back and do some further study, are all the good jobs already taken, or is there always an opportunity?
Not by any stretch, I don't think. I don't think we're at the crest of the wave. I think it's going to continue, and I think we're on an upward momentum, and it will continue for a long period until it becomes synonymous with any business strategy and approach, that you should only operate if you do it in a responsible manner. And it needs to be the right thing to do, but it also needs to be supported by legislation. And we are seeing that starting to move quicker and quicker in this region. And Singapore's leading the way on that in many respects. In terms of role types, if you come from a technical, scientific background, things like life cycle analysis and circularity roles where you're dealing with the actual chemical basis of a product or packaging, and looking at opportunities for that to be reused in another product cycle. That's very technical, scientific sort of.
Yeah. So I mean, so the question was, I mean, what qualifications speak to that kind of stuff? Are there institutions, organizations, qualifications, labels, certifications that are particularly in demand right now?
There are many, Teymoor. I think that's where I'm going with this, is that there's technical opportunities there's more generous sustainable operations within business opportunity, sort of upskilling programs. There's sustainability communications sort of subset there as well. There are many, and I think depending on what your current skill set is, you must utilize that on your transition. I don't think dropping everything that you've spent your career sort of, or your early stage of your career developing and moving into a entirely different sector. I think you need to leverage off of what you've built so far as a foundation and look at what is the most appropriate type of opportunity inside the sustainability agenda.
Is there any one university or program that you just take as a tick? Well, I've done that, so we'll give them the tick they can pass through. And I'm thinking in particular a famous UK university in this part of the world. Their courses on sustainability seem to do very well.
Of course, there's the CISL, which you used to support.
So I am often part of their faculty when they come to Singapore.
CISL do some great courses, and some of my colleagues have sort of done those as part of their upskilling journey, moving from a general recruitment role into our specialized world to try and get themselves up to speed and build their credibility. But there are others as well. In Singapore, the SMU have a really interesting mid-careerist transition course that is worth looking at as well. There's different modules, and you can sort of build a version of that course that fits the direction that you're looking to go in. And we've got some good feedback from those that have gone through that transition. And you're looking at people with 2 to 3 years experience up to sort of COOs going through that sort of course, which is really interesting. There's many out there, and there's opportunities to pick up specialized sort of modules as you go as well. So there's lots of opportunities out there, and we've mentioned 2, but I don't want to sort of close the book on those being the only 2. There are a plethora of opportunities to sort of upskill yourself out there, and if anyone can do some digging and sort of find out those key ones that fit the journey that they're looking to achieve. But I think it's important to take stock of what you currently have as a skill set and an ability, look at where you'd like to go, and start to roadmap that with the courses along the way.
That's got to be a really hard thing to do. I mean, can you give any advice as to how somebody can sit there and say, how does my current skill set in my current job apply to something a bit more sustainability themed? I mean,
I have a bridging question there, because we've gone down the path of formal education, but actually you can get experience. So we spoke about building up your experience within your organization and formal education, but a lot of people go and volunteer with different organizations. So then they're taking their skill set that they have. Maybe they're an accountant and they go and volunteer for an environmental NGO. So they're taking their skill set to a different organization. I mean, how as a recruiter do you look at volunteer experience in, let's say, not-for-profit sector that might lead to developing those skill sets?
I think it's really, really important, and it's a piece of advice, and I'm glad you mentioned that I often give when speaking to those that are looking to potentially make a transition and asking me this $1 million question that Teymoor was putting to me is actually, how do you do it? I mean, I wish it was as simple as giving a one-line answer to anybody looking to make this transition, but it's complex, it's challenging. It's not for the faint-hearted to go and change your career, but and it depends on a variety of factors. But you're completely right, Darian. Going and spending a bit of your personal time shows the dedication behind it all, but it also gives you that opportunity to learn and develop around the sort of concept that you're interested in moving towards. So very much so, and I think everybody should be doing volunteer work, no matter what it is you're looking to achieve from
the organizations I volunteer for, like I feel like I learn as much from them as they get the benefit from my skills. And they're 2 different ones. One is the Marine Stewardship Council, which is about sustainable seafood. The other one, Be Slavery Free, about ending modern slavery. But you learn so much more. You meet a whole different group of people than you otherwise may have in your more traditional business roles.
But I'm going to press you on this, Greg, just for a second, the $1 million question, because for people to actually really make that commitment to take a jump, they want a bit of support. They want to think, okay, this is not just a ridiculous fancy, and particularly in Asia, where so often, I spent 10 years ago when startup culture was really beginning to be the thing around Singapore. Oh, we're going to be a startup, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. The thing I kept hearing from people was, my parents won't let me do it. My parents insist I'm a doctor or a lawyer. So making that commitment and make the change is a big psychological step. So if there was one tip that you would say to somebody, mid-career individual sitting in a company, being a lawyer or an accountant or something, what would that be in terms of think about what would they have to say to you to make you think, okay, this person's got potential in that role?
I can give a few tips. Find somebody that is willing to talk to you in the industry or a conduit into the industry like what we do, and spend some time with them around your specific experience to date and your ambitions. That's really important. Spend your time outside of work researching, understanding concepts, sustainability concepts and challenges that businesses are facing, new legislation, being up to date in a very fast-paced environment like this with happenings and sort of current affairs is really, really important and a key part of the job. We call it horizon scanning in a more formal context of the actual role. Spend a bit of your own time doing the volunteer work, like Darian suggested. I absolutely think that that's an important part of it, and have some conviction in your passion. I think that if I am speaking to somebody talking about the potential for the transition, and they're seeing it as a monetary opportunity, it might not get my buy-in. If I see that passion and conviction, that might get a bit of me spending some of my spare time helping that individual.
And maybe be prepared to disappoint your parents.
Yeah.
Spoken as one who's disappointed their parents many times.
Brilliant advice to the world.
Now, I want to ask you, we're probably getting to the end of this, a big question. You can change the names of the guilty and the innocent, but have you ever been given a brief for an impossible role to fill? And why was it impossible, and what did you do?
It's definitely happened. Just trying to think about which example I'd like to bring up. I'm definitely not going to name and shame, but there has been a couple of examples, and it probably falls into the very technical side of things, where we're looking at sort of 7+ years of qualification, academic qualification, plus many years of experience. And I mentioned LCA earlier, which is life cycle assessment. Life cycle assessment inside a complex consumer goods business with a global supply chain. That actual assessment per product can take 1.5 years to conduct with a qualified scientist in life cycle assessment. I was working with a consumer goods business that wanted, I think it was 10 of them within the space of a year. We did a global search and found about 3 available on a global basis to the extent of what they were after, and we were offering them about 1/5 of the kind of current salary that they were on. So we made no placements and said thank you for the time. If there's no budging on this, unfortunately, I don't think us or anyone else can help, and we sort of handed it back to them. We did have a conversation later where there'd been some changes and some parameters had opened up and re-engaged, and I think we made a success of a few placements in the end, but it does happen. And even when we offer our best advice, sometimes a recruiter, a headhunter telling you need to spend more for what you want doesn't always land well. So you've got to sort of show that with your homework of actually who's in the market and what people are looking to be rewarded for what they do. And as I say, when the talent market is not in sync at the moment in this space in many regards. I mean, there's different skill sets that have different scenarios, but there are some areas that the supply of talent is so far below the demand that the cost of individuals and competent individuals has shot up quite a lot. And that's making things a bit complicated. It's a bubble, like you see in any other marketplace.
Just to follow up on that thing, you mentioned don't come into this if you have a monetary mindset. Is that a good rule of thumb? I mean, apart from the really specialist skills where there's a talent shortage, presumably sustainability transition is not something people do if they're looking for wealth.
I think it needs to be both, right? But I think if your only driver to either to create a business or to move your career towards sustainability, your only driver is because you think it can pay you better. I think for the amount of yourself you need to give, and the commitment to the cause you need to have, and the amount of no's or challenges you may get, I don't think that that's the right reason. I think it can be both, but not alone. Something that we do see more of in this region is organizations seeing the business opportunity of being a responsible operating organization more often than we see it elsewhere. I think in the UK and in Europe, we saw a lot of businesses, and we still do, doing it because it's the right thing to do, and then because legislation is pushing it. I think the competitive advantage is more prevalent in a responsible business where it helps with your costings because you're not facing so many sort of potential sort of unexpected factors and costs in your process or projects or whatever the case is. But the competitive advantage of access to sort of cheaper capital by showing your responsibility and green loans and things like that has landed in Asia quite well. And I think it's good to have that because we work in mostly a capitalist society, and I think that we need to see the commercial outcomes of being a responsible business at the forefront. But I think as an individual, you kind of need to be balanced.
I think going back 20 years, you only had people who were passionate going into sustainability because there were no high-paid roles. None of them were high-paid. Yeah. So now it is interesting that there are high-paid roles that report to the CEO or even are the CEO that just didn't exist before. So I think it attracts both groups of people now, those who are passionate and maybe those who see it as a developing career.
And this is also where a transitioning individual into the space can be very, very valuable, is by bringing that commercial edge to a sustainability conversation and assisting sustainability teams with being very clear to the organization or potential clients or whoever the stakeholders are on the return on investment in the right way. That's a skill set that is definitely in demand.
Look, there are so many little side avenues that we sort of touched on here that we should get you back and talk. Well, we should get them back and talk about specific ones at some point in the future, I think.
Appreciate that.
Definitely. It was a great conversation. Thanks for coming in, Greg.
Thanks both for having me.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Thanks for watching. Now, the whole purpose of this series is to be able to inspire others to take action to make their careers more green and to think about how they can influence the green agenda within the companies that they already work for. And I hope if you are inspired at all, then you'll get in touch and engage with us a bit.
Now, we know just from speaking with all of our guests that this can sometimes be a minefield. It's hard to know where to start, what are the best courses, what are the best sources of information. So if you'd like to get in contact, please email us on the email below or contact us through LinkedIn.
And if you have any thoughts about kind of subjects you'd like to hear us discuss or people or industries that you'd like featured on the conversation, let us know about that as well. Get in touch.
Thank you.